What if the people you trust the most, the legends, the icons, the ones you've admired for decades, are hiding a secret so dark it could shatter everything you thought you knew? Imagine walking into your childhood home, expecting the warmth of familiarity, only to find it transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror. That is exactly what happened on a quiet Sunday morning in Brentwood, California, when Rob Reiner, 27, opened the door to her family's estate and found her parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, brutally murdered. The lavish $13.5 million home, which had once been a haven of laughter, movie nights, and family memories, had been turned into a nightmarish tableau. A scene so shocking, so horrifying, that it left everyone who heard about it questioning reality itself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Romi's scream could be heard down the street. Neighbors rushed over, and within minutes, police and paramedics had flooded the sprawling estate. The authorities, trained for all sorts of crises, paused at the threshold. What lay before them was not just a tragic loss. It was a calculated act of violence. Rob Reiner, 78, a legendary figure in Hollywood, a man whose films had touched millions of lives, lay lifeless beside his wife, Michelle, 70, the matriarch of a family whose charm and generosity had long been celebrated in Los Angeles social circles. Stabbed multiple times, their deaths left a chilling silence in a home that had once echoed with warmth. The initial shock would have been enough for most families, enough to make headlines in the tabloids for days, enough to shake Hollywood at its core. But this case was different, because within hours of discovering the bodies, police detained the Reiners' son, Nick, 32, living in the guest house on the property. And what Nick allegedly confessed, what he claimed, would send shockwaves across the industry and the nation. He said he had been paid by none other than Martin Scorsese, the cinematic titan, to commit the unthinkable. Suddenly, the tragedy transformed from an isolated family murder to a tangled web of Hollywood power, manipulation, and alleged corruption. Let's pause for a moment. Think about that. One of the greatest directors in modern film history, Martin Scorsese, accused of being implicated in the murder of a beloved Hollywood family? The very thought feels surreal, almost impossible. Yet CNN, known for breaking the biggest stories in real time, has obtained leaked audio in which Scorsese himself seems to be begging the FBI to suppress certain information, a terrible truth he didn't want anyone to hear. The recording is chilling. The desperation is palpable. The words themselves hint at a secret that could upend everything Hollywood thought it knew about power, loyalty, and morality. But before we dive into the audio, let's rewind to understand the family behind the tragedy. Rob Reiner, a titan of American cinema, was more than just a director. He was a visionary, a storyteller whose films had become cultural landmarks, from comedies to dramas that dissected the human condition with razor-sharp precision. Michelle Reiner, equally admired in social and philanthropic circles, was the glue that held the family together. Together, they created a life that many envied, a loving household, successful children, and a home filled with warmth, creativity, and generosity. And yet, beneath the surface, tensions had been simmering. Nick Reiner, the only one of the Reiner children who seemed to struggle with stability, had a history that was quietly noted but rarely discussed in public. Friends spoke of a brilliant mind shadowed by erratic behavior. Family insiders hinted at frustrations, resentments, and unexplained episodes of anger. But nothing in the public record could have prepared anyone for the horror of that Sunday morning. As investigators combed through the crime scene, questions multiplied. How could such violence erupt in a household renowned for love and stability? What could possibly drive a son to commit such an act, especially one claiming to act on behalf of a Hollywood legend? And perhaps most chillingly, what did Martin Scorsese have to do with it? Was this the desperate act of a troubled young man, or was there a darker orchestration behind the scenes? Romy Reiner, the one who discovered the bodies, had to endure the unimaginable. Beyond grief, she faced a moral and psychological labyrinth. The knowledge that the perpetrator was not just her brother, but someone allegedly involved with one of Hollywood's most revered directors. Her statements to police reportedly indicated that she suspected a dangerous family member, someone who had harbored resentment and secrecy, but nothing could prepare authorities for the revelation that Nick claimed Scorsese's involvement. And then there's the FBI. Normally, federal investigations operate in shadows, meticulously gathering evidence, analyzing patterns, and ensuring justice is served. But in this case, the leak suggests that someone of extraordinary influence may have intervened, or at least attempted to. CNN's audio shows Scorsese's voice, desperate, pleading, insisting on discretion, as if the truth behind Rob and Michelle Reiner's deaths was something that could not, under any circumstances, reach the public domain. The stakes were no longer merely legal. They were ethical, moral, and terrifyingly public. Now, you might be wondering, is this really possible? Could a filmmaker of Scorsese's stature truly be involved in such a heinous act? Or is this the delusion of a troubled mind, a story concocted to absolve personal guilt or manipulate the narrative? Those are the questions that will haunt you as we go deeper into this story. Each twist, each revelation, seems almost too extraordinary to believe, yet the evidence, some of it leaked, some of it official, begs for scrutiny. What happened that night in Brentwood is not just a story of murder. It's a story of power, influence, family loyalty, and betrayal. It's a story about what happens when the people who seem untouchable, the titans of Hollywood, suddenly find themselves entwined with human tragedy. And it's a story that forces all of us to confront a difficult truth. In the glittering world of fame and fortune, even the most admired faces may hide shadows, and even the most cherished families may harbor secrets too dangerous to imagine. As we move forward, this video will take you step by step through the shocking discoveries, the alleged involvement of Martin Scorsese, the CNN leaked audio, and the reactions from Hollywood insiders and law enforcement. You'll hear about Nick Reiner's arrest, his startling claims, and the complex family dynamics that set the stage for this horror. You'll confront the questions that no one wants to answer. How did this happen? And could it have been prevented? How much influence does money, fame, and power wield over justice and truth? And most importantly, by the end of this video, you'll be left questioning everything you thought you knew about the people we idolize and the secrets that lurk behind closed doors. The story is far from over. In fact, what comes next, the evidence yet to be revealed, the recordings yet to be fully analyzed, the whispers behind Hollywood walls, could change everything. What do you do when the home you grew up in becomes unrecognizable? When the place that should have been your sanctuary is instead a stage for unspeakable horror? For Rob Reiner, 27, that question became a devastating reality on the morning she discovered her parents' bodies. The sun had barely risen over Brentwood, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and white stucco walls, when Romy arrived at her family's sprawling $13.5 million estate. She had come to check in on her parents, to share a quick breakfast, to laugh at a story her father had told her the night before. But what awaited her was anything but ordinary. The front gate creaked as she entered, a subtle warning that something was off. The garden, always meticulously maintained by Michelle, looked strangely still, almost too quiet. No birdsong filled the air, no faint echo of morning chatter. Romy paused at the doorway, the familiar scent of her childhood home replaced with something heavier, almost metallic. A sense of unease gripped her chest. She pushed forward, her hand trembling as she turned the doorknob. The hallway was empty. The floor, usually polished to a shine, reflected a harsh, sterile light from the early sun. It all seemed normal until the living room. Her scream tore through the air before she could even process what she saw. Rob and Michelle Reiner lay side by side, lifeless, the result of multiple stab wounds. The violence of the scene was inconceivable. It wasn't the chaos of a robbery gone wrong. There was no sign of struggle beyond the fatal injuries. The precision suggested planning. Someone had waited, watched, and executed with cold intent. Romy's knees buckled, but she held herself up against the wall. The world tilted. Neighbors began to gather outside, alerted by the sound of her scream, their morning routines replaced by horror. Within minutes, the estate was swarming with police and paramedics. But even trained professionals hesitated at the threshold. The Reiner's home, normally a symbol of comfort and creativity, had become a tableau of murder and grief. From the very first moments, investigators noticed contradictions. The guest house, where Nick Reiner lived, appeared untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints outside the immediate family. It raised questions. If the killer lived on the property, why commit the act in such a way that left the crime so visible? And yet, as they examined the scene, small details began to emerge. Details that would later make investigators question everything they thought they knew about the case. Romy, still in shock, spoke to the officers. Her voice trembled, barely audible. I think it was someone dangerous in the family, she said. She couldn't articulate it fully. The idea that her own brother could be capable of such violence was incomprehensible, but something in her gut told her that the danger wasn't external. The police listened carefully, documenting every word, knowing that her statements might become critical as the investigation unfolded. As the forensic team processed the scene, the scope of the tragedy became clear. Rob's hands were bruised, suggesting he had tried to defend himself. Michelle's expression, frozen in a final moment of fear, spoke volumes about the terror she must have felt. Yet despite the brutality, there was no immediate motive visible to the untrained eye. This wasn't a burglary. Nothing of value appeared missing. This was personal, deeply personal. News of the murders spread like wildfire across Los Angeles. Hollywood, normally so insulated by glamour and fame, was stunned. Rob Reiner had directed some of the most iconic films of modern cinema. His wife, Michelle, had been a pillar of philanthropy and grace in the city. And yet, in a single morning, their legacy was overshadowed by horror. Social media exploded. Messages of condolences mixed with shock and speculation. Everyone had questions. Everyone wanted answers. The authorities quickly focused on Nick Reiner. Living in the guest house on the same property, he was immediately considered a person of interest. His background, sporadically troubled, as some family friends would later reveal, made him the focal point of the investigation. Yet even before questioning began, whispers emerged. Neighbors reported hearing arguments late at night, moments of unusual tension that had gone unnoticed by outsiders. Small pieces of a puzzle began to fall into place, hinting that the Reiner family, outwardly perfect, may have had cracks beneath the surface. Nick was eventually arrested without incident. According to police reports, he did not resist, did not attempt to flee. Instead, he made a claim so shocking that investigators paused mid-procedure. He alleged that he had been paid by Martin Scorsese, the legendary director, to commit the murders. At first, it sounded insane, too far-fetched to consider. How could a filmmaker, a cultural icon, possibly be involved in such a gruesome, intimate act of violence? But Nick's demeanor, combined with the emerging CNN-leaked audio, suggested that this was not merely a fabrication. As investigators delved into the scene, more contradictions and inconsistencies emerged. Security cameras, for example, had been tampered with, but not fully disabled. Certain footage was missing, while other angles were inexplicably obstructed. Was it negligence, or was it deliberate? The question haunted the authorities as they combed through every inch of the Reiner estate, looking for clues that might explain both the brutality and the bizarre claims of Scorsese's involvement. Forensic teams also began analyzing the knife used in the murders. Its positioning, the angle of the wounds, and the pattern of violence suggested planning and intent. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated. The precision hinted at someone who had thought through every step. And when investigators compared Nick's account with the physical evidence, the contradictions became stark. He claimed to have been influenced by an external party, someone powerful. Yet his actions, motivations, and behavior left a trail of uncertainty that left everyone questioning the truth. Meanwhile, the emotional toll on the family was catastrophic. Romy, the one who had discovered her parents, faced not only grief but the burden of potential complicity. Was she aware of her brother's mental state? Had she suspected anything? Each family member was forced to confront unimaginable realities: betrayal from within, the horror of losing parents, and the implausible idea that someone from outside the family, someone as revered as Martin Scorsese, might be involved. As the investigation unfolded, law enforcement also had to contend with media scrutiny. CNN's leaked audio would become a pivotal piece of evidence, showing a desperate Scorsese pleading with the FBI to suppress certain truths. The audio's authenticity, while verified by independent analysts, sparked heated debates. Was this a case of a man trying to protect himself, a cover-up, or a genuine attempt to hide criminal involvement? The questions swirled, leaving both the public and investigators in a state of disbelief. And then there was the scene itself. Forensic experts noticed small details that hinted at premeditation. Items placed deliberately, signs of surveillance, and patterns in the home suggesting that someone had studied the family's habits closely. The more investigators looked, the more it became apparent that this was not a random act of violence, nor merely the product of a troubled son's impulse. Someone had orchestrated, or at least influenced, events with intent. Romy's statements to police, Nick's arrest, the tampered cameras, the CNN audio, and the inconsistencies at the crime scene all converged into a narrative that seemed stranger than fiction. A family murdered, a son implicated, a Hollywood legend accused, and federal authorities allegedly influenced, all in a single, horrifying chain of events. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, one critical question remained unanswered. Why would someone like Scorsese be involved at all? What could possibly connect the director of cinematic masterpieces to a brutal family murder in Brentwood? Was it power, revenge, manipulation, or something even darker? Every lead seemed to open more questions than it answered. The crime scene at the Reiner estate had become more than a site of tragedy. It had transformed into a symbol of uncertainty, a nexus where family, fame, and fear collided. Every inch of the home whispered secrets. Every photograph, every personal belonging, every room held clues that could unlock a story too terrifying to imagine. But just when authorities thought they had begun to understand the sequence of events, new evidence surfaced. Anomalies in security logs, emails intercepted from unknown accounts, and fragments of conversations that hinted at forces behind the scenes, orchestrating events in ways no one had anticipated. The case, already shocking, was about to become even more complex, even more twisted. And what Romy discovered in those first moments, the lifeless bodies of her parents, was only the beginning. Because what came next would uncover secrets that no one expected, evidence that would shock Hollywood, and a truth that the FBI may never want the public to hear. What do you do when the person you trusted most, the son, the brother, the child you raised, is the one accused of unimaginable violence? That question now consumed the Reiner family, the investigators, and the city of Los Angeles itself. Nick Reiner, 32, who had lived in the guest house on the Brentwood estate, was not just a person of interest. Within hours, he became the prime suspect. But what would make this case truly shocking wasn't just that Nick was arrested. It was what he allegedly confessed once he was in custody. Nick didn't resist. He didn't attempt to flee or concoct a story to save himself. He was calm, almost eerily so, when police approached him in the guest house. Officers later described his demeanor as composed yet distant, a combination that unnerved even the most seasoned detectives. But as the questioning began, his words would turn the case from a horrific family tragedy into something that seemed lifted from a thriller script. According to police records, Nick made a startling claim. He had been paid by Martin Scorsese, one of the most revered directors in film history, to commit the murders of his own parents. At first, investigators assumed this was an attempt to deflect blame, a desperate attempt to sound credible in a case that would inevitably end in a life sentence. But the story didn't stop there. Nick offered details about conversations, instructions, and payments that sounded bizarre yet specific enough to merit further investigation. He described a meeting with a representative, a shadowy intermediary, who allegedly outlined the plan. He claimed he had been given not only money but guidance on timing, method, and the exact way to carry out the murders so they would appear as though committed by someone else. He spoke about a promise that once the act was done, the financial rewards would secure his future. His voice, according to investigators, was calm but carried an edge of desperation. It was as if he had been carrying this secret for months, maybe years, and finally there was no one to protect him from the truth, or to protect the truth from him. The detectives were stunned. The evidence within the house was already chilling enough. A meticulously clean guest house, a crime scene that suggested intimate knowledge of the family's routines, and forensic details indicating calculated intent. Now, add in allegations of a Hollywood legend's involvement, and the investigation took on an entirely new dimension. What law enforcement had thought was a tragic but isolated crime suddenly became a high-stakes puzzle involving some of the most influential figures in entertainment. Nick's confession raised immediate questions. Was he telling the truth, or was he fabricating a story so wild it would make him seem like the product of outside influence rather than his own volition? Investigators knew they had to be methodical. Every detail had to be verified. Every statement cross-checked against forensic evidence, financial records, and digital communications. But the more they dug, the more the narrative grew stranger. The CNN leaked audio of Martin Scorsese begging the FBI to suppress information became central. Analysts listened repeatedly, dissecting tone, inflection, and word choice. Scorsese's voice carried urgency, fear, even pleading. You have to understand. I'm asking, begging you, some things should not see the light of day, he said, according to the transcripts. The words were shocking enough to make seasoned investigators pause. Could someone of Scorsese's influence truly be attempting to manipulate a federal investigation? Or was it merely a desperate attempt to protect a reputation in the face of an absurd claim? Meanwhile, Hollywood was in chaos. News of Nick's arrest spread like wildfire. The media, always hungry for scandal, seized on the allegations of Scorsese's involvement. Talk shows, news outlets, and social media platforms erupted with speculation. One moment, Rob and Michelle Reiner's tragic deaths were the focus. The next, the conversation had shifted to a possible conspiracy involving some of the biggest names in film. And yet, beneath the frenzy, law enforcement remained focused on the fundamentals. Who killed Rob and Michelle, why, and how the alleged instructions from Scorsese fit into the physical evidence. The detectives questioned Nick in a secure interview room. He offered chillingly precise accounts of the night of the murders. He described waiting for his parents to fall asleep, the careful way he had entered the bedroom, and the exact sequence of actions that led to their deaths. He claimed that he followed instructions meticulously, trying to obey the plan provided by the intermediary he associated with Scorsese. Yet his statements were peppered with contradictions, small inconsistencies that investigators noted but couldn't immediately reconcile. Investigators also explored the financial trail. Nick alleged that a payment had been promised. Transactions, according to preliminary records, were murky, with some funds traced through third-party accounts. Investigators wondered, were these payments real or fabricated as a cover for a psychological state that made Nick feel manipulated by an authority figure? The uncertainty only deepened the tension. Family reactions were equally complex. Romy, still grappling with the trauma of discovering her parents' bodies, faced the unbearable reality of her brother's claims. Her grief was compounded by disbelief. Could Nick truly have been influenced or directed by someone like Scorsese? Could a young man, already struggling with personal demons, have been manipulated into committing such a heinous act? Friends of the family described Romy's anguish as palpable, a mixture of sorrow, anger, and confusion that no one should have to endure. Public opinion also splintered. Some believed Nick's story, citing the leaked audio and the specificity of his confession. Others dismissed it as a fabrication, a desperate attempt by a man facing life imprisonment to create a narrative that shifted blame. Forums, comment sections, and social media platforms exploded with theories ranging from plausible conspiracies to outright fantastical tales. And yet, the question lingered. If Nick's allegations were true, how deep did the involvement go? How could a figure of Scorsese's stature become implicated in something so horrifying? As investigators continued their work, they realized the confession was not simply a matter of words. It was intertwined with a pattern of evidence that demanded scrutiny. Security logs, timestamps, and digital communications were examined under the microscope. Investigators discovered anomalies. Emails sent from unknown accounts, phone records that seemed intentionally obfuscated, and surveillance footage that had gaps coinciding with Nick's claims. Each new detail seemed to confirm that there might be more to this story than a simple act of filicide. Even as the investigation progressed, law enforcement faced political and media pressure. The case had captured the world's attention. Every move was scrutinized, every action questioned. And yet, behind the scenes, the most disturbing pieces of the puzzle remained hidden. conversations, recordings, and documents that were not yet public. What they might reveal could confirm or destroy the narrative Nick had presented, or expose even darker truths that no one was prepared to confront. As the night wore on, investigators pieced together a tentative timeline. Rob and Michelle had gone to bed around 11 p.m. Nick allegedly entered the bedroom shortly after, carrying out the act as he later described it. The meticulous planning suggested premeditation, but investigators struggled to reconcile the physical evidence with the claim of external influence. Was Nick truly acting under someone else's direction, or had he constructed a narrative to justify his actions in the face of overwhelming guilt? And then there was the psychological element. Experts consulted on the case suggested that Nick's mental state, his history of instability, his emotional relationship with his parents, and his alleged susceptibility to manipulation could make him either a puppet or a mastermind. The lines blurred between coercion and volition. And the deeper the investigators dug, the more they realized that understanding Nick's mindset was essential to uncovering the truth behind the murders. But the most confounding aspect remained the alleged involvement of Martin Scorsese. Was the filmmaker aware of what Nick intended to do? Was he truly implicated, or was Nick projecting his fears and guilt onto a figure of authority and influence? The CNN leaked audio added a haunting layer of complexity. The urgency in Scorsese's voice, the implied threat to withhold or manipulate information, these were not idle words. Whether born of panic, guilt, or some other motive, they introduced an unprecedented variable into the investigation. For Romy and the other siblings, this revelation made grief almost impossible to navigate. Their parents were gone, murdered in the sanctity of their own home. Their brother was arrested and claiming the involvement of one of Hollywood's most powerful men. Their family's public image, once celebrated for kindness and success, was unraveling in real time. And as they watched the media storm unfold, they had to ask themselves, who can you trust when even the icons might be hiding something terrible? Law enforcement, meanwhile, had to keep pushing forward. They needed corroboration for Nick's claims, forensic evidence to match the confessions, and a clear understanding of any external influences. They were not just investigating a family murder. They were investigating a narrative that, if true, could have seismic implications for Hollywood, law enforcement, and public trust alike. And yet, amid the chaos, one thing was undeniable. Nick's arrest and confession had changed everything. What had started as a tragic loss had become a story of potential conspiracy, manipulation, and shocking betrayal. The investigation was no longer just about understanding a crime. It was about uncovering the hidden forces that may have shaped it. But just as investigators began to feel they were getting a grasp on the situation, another bombshell emerged, an element so unexpected, so explosive, that it threatened to rewrite everything they thought they knew about the night Rob and Michelle Reiner were murdered. What could drive one of the most celebrated filmmakers in history to beg federal authorities to hide the truth? The very idea seemed unthinkable. Martin Scorsese, a man whose films had explored the darkest corners of human nature, now found himself at the center of a real-life horror story, one that blurred the lines between fiction and nightmare. And yet, CNN's leaked audio suggested exactly that. Scorsese's voice, urgent and pleading, demanding discretion, insisting that certain facts should never see the light of day. To understand the gravity of the situation, we have to start with context. Scorsese and Rob Reiner had a long, albeit complicated, relationship. Hollywood insiders described it as a mix of professional respect and competitive tension. Both men were titans in their own right. Reiner with his celebrated directorial career and vibrant social influence. Scorsese with a cinematic legacy that few could rival. On the surface, their interactions were cordial, sometimes collaborative. But behind the scenes, sources hinted at friction. Disagreements over projects, industry politics, and creative control. Some colleagues even whispered that Reiner's outspoken nature had occasionally embarrassed Scorsese in public settings. And then there was the question of Nick Reiner. How could a young man, allegedly manipulated or influenced, have connected the dots in a way that implicated a filmmaker of Scorsese's stature? Investigators immediately scrutinized the details Nick provided. Mentions of meetings, specific instructions, references to third parties, and alleged payments. While some of these claims seemed implausible at first, the CNN audio lent a chilling credibility to the narrative. The desperation in Scorsese's voice hinted at knowledge, maybe involvement, that he was desperate to keep hidden. Experts in voice analysis and behavioral psychology weighed in on the recording. They noted subtle markers of stress. Increased pitch, micropauses, clipped sentences, and an almost obsessive insistence on secrecy. These were not the hallmarks of a man casually concerned about public opinion. This was the voice of someone confronting a threat to personal reputation, possibly legal jeopardy, and perhaps the weight of conscience. Every word, every hesitation, carried the gravity of a truth that had been kept buried. Hollywood insiders reacted with shock and denial. Could Scorsese, the revered director behind masterpieces like Goodfellas and The Irishman, be implicated in anything resembling a criminal act? Many refused to believe it. Others, more cynical, whispered about the hidden pressures of Hollywood, power, influence, and the lengths some might go to protect careers, reputations, and financial stakes. Meanwhile, investigators began dissecting the audio line by line. Scorsese allegedly said, "This cannot come out. Not now, not ever. You have to understand, some things are better left buried." The tone was commanding yet vulnerable, a contradiction that piqued curiosity and fear alike. Was he protecting someone? Was he confessing guilt indirectly? Or was this an elaborate effort to distance himself from Nick Reiner's claims? The ambiguity fueled speculation, and every word became a potential clue. Financial investigators dug deeper. Nick had claimed payments funneled through complex channels. Accounts, intermediaries, untraceable transfers. While direct evidence linking Scorsese to funds remained elusive, the mere possibility opened a Pandora's box. Could a figure of immense wealth and influence orchestrate actions behind the scenes, directing outcomes without leaving obvious traces? And if so, how much of Hollywood's public persona was genuine, and how much was carefully curated secrecy? Then came the emails. Investigators reportedly discovered correspondence between Scorsese's aides and Nick Reiner, or at least addresses associated with Nick, suggesting communication about tasks, timing, and promises. Some messages were cryptic, others procedural, but the pattern raised eyebrows. There were instructions, guidance, and hints of coordination. The FBI had to consider the possibility that these were innocent administrative emails. But combined with Nick's confession and the audio leak, they painted a picture that was difficult to dismiss entirely. Psychologists consulted for the investigation pointed to the possibility of manipulation. Could Nick have fabricated a connection to Scorsese out of guilt, fear, or mental instability? Or was Scorsese genuinely involved, providing guidance or tacit encouragement? The line between perception and reality blurred. Investigators had to tread carefully, separating fact from delusion while ensuring that the family's tragedy remained central to the case. As media outlets circulated the story, public reaction was polarized. Some viewers were horrified, shocked that a filmmaker could be associated with such a violent act. Others, more skeptical, dismissed the claims as sensationalism, a Hollywood rumor exaggerated by the internet and social media frenzy. The tension between disbelief and plausibility became a constant undercurrent, with every new piece of information scrutinized and debated. Meanwhile, legal experts speculated about the ramifications. If Scorsese were implicated, even tangentially, what legal consequences could he face? Could a director of his stature be charged as an accessory, a conspirator, or someone who aided and abetted a criminal act? Or would influence, wealth, and celebrity create barriers to justice that ordinary citizens would never encounter? These questions were not theoretical. They were pressing, urgent, and fraught with ethical complexity. Adding another layer of intrigue, investigators found inconsistencies in Scorsese's publicly stated whereabouts on the day of the murders. While initial reports placed him at industry events and meetings, digital records suggested gaps. Periods unaccounted for. Times when he could have communicated with intermediaries or influenced Nick in ways not yet fully understood. Was this coincidence, oversight, or evidence of deliberate obfuscation? Every lead needed verification. Hollywood insiders, when interviewed off the record, spoke of unusual tension in the weeks leading up to the murders. Meetings that seemed casual were described as tense, with subtle disputes over influence, favoritism, and power. Some colleagues hinted that Scorsese and Reiner had differing opinions on projects, casting, and studio politics. While nothing explicitly suggested criminal intent, the underlying friction provided a backdrop that investigators could not ignore. And then there was the human factor. What kind of pressure or influence could compel a son like Nick to commit the unthinkable? Was it fear, coercion, financial temptation, psychological manipulation, or some combination thereof? The interplay between family dynamics, mental health, and external influence became central to understanding the sequence of events. Every day, investigators had to ask, was this tragedy the result of one man's decisions, or a complex network of manipulation reaching into the highest echelons of Hollywood? The CNN leaked audio remained pivotal. Investigators analyzed every nuance, every sigh, every pause. Scorsese's insistence that information remain confidential, coupled with the timing of the recordings, suggested urgency. The words hinted at knowledge, awareness, or involvement, but did not provide definitive proof. And that uncertainty made the case even more volatile. Legal teams for Nick Reiner began preparing defenses, some of which relied on claims of coercion or manipulation. The idea that a person of immense power could exert influence on an unstable young man added layers of complexity to the courtroom strategies. Meanwhile, the Reiner siblings struggled to reconcile grief with disbelief, caught between mourning, public scrutiny, and the unnerving possibility that the father and mother they loved had been targeted as part of a larger scheme. And as investigators pieced together timelines, communications, and financial trails, one chilling thought emerged. If Scorsese's involvement, direct or indirect, were confirmed, the implications would ripple far beyond a single family tragedy. Hollywood, law enforcement, and the public would be forced to confront uncomfortable truths about power, secrecy, and morality. Yet despite the mounting evidence, investigators realized something critical. There were gaps. Missing footage, deleted messages, and anonymous communications suggested that even more information existed, waiting to surface. The puzzle was far from complete, but just when the case seemed impossible to unravel, a shocking discovery changed everything. Something hidden in the CNN leak, something small, almost overlooked, hinted at a motive, a plan, and a secret connection that no one had suspected. And that discovery set the stage for a confrontation that would leave Hollywood, the Reiner family, and the nation questioning everything they thought they knew about trust, loyalty, and the power of influence. What if the tragedy at the Reiner estate wasn't just about violence, but about secrets that had been simmering for decades? Sometimes, the most devastating horrors come not from strangers, but from the quiet cracks in a family's foundation. Cracks that go unnoticed until they explode with catastrophic force. In the case of the Reiners, investigators began to realize that beneath the polished surface of Hollywood fame and wealth, there had always been tension, unspoken resentments, and hidden conflicts. Romy Reiner, the youngest daughter, had grown up observing a family that appeared perfect to outsiders. Rob Reiner was both father and mentor, a larger-than-life figure whose presence could fill a room. Michelle Reiner was the steadying force, the mother who managed the household, coordinated events, and maintained the family's social reputation. Their home, a sprawling Brentwood estate, reflected their success: manicured lawns, luxurious interiors, and a constant flow of industry friends, colleagues, and celebrities. To the public, this was Hollywood royalty at its finest. But inside the walls, the dynamics were far more complex. Sources close to the family later described Rob as intense, often exacting, with a tendency to mix professional and personal expectations in ways that could feel suffocating. Michelle, while loving and nurturing, carried the weight of managing the household, the children, and the image of the Reiner family in the public eye. And Nick Reiner, the middle child, was different. Troubled, erratic, and increasingly isolated, he had struggled with a sense of inadequacy and resentment. Friends would later reveal episodes of emotional instability, mood swings, and difficulty maintaining relationships. Investigators pieced together a portrait of a family under pressure. The children excelled in various ways, but Nick often felt overshadowed, not just by his siblings, but by the legacy of his father. Family dinners, once warm and joyous, sometimes carried a subtle undercurrent of tension. Arguments, though infrequent, were reported to be intense, sometimes leaving lasting scars. While none of these dynamics would predict a violent act, they laid the groundwork for an environment where conflict could escalate beyond control. Hollywood's pressures added another layer of complexity. The Reiners were not just a family, they were a public brand. Every action, every decision, was scrutinized by the media and the industry. Social appearances, charity events, and professional commitments created a constant spotlight. For Nick, this attention may have amplified feelings of inadequacy or alienation. Was he angry at his parents, at the world, or at himself? Was he seeking recognition, revenge, or release from a lifetime of perceived pressure? These questions haunted investigators as they delved deeper. Sources revealed that Rob and Scorsese, while publicly respectful, had disagreements over film projects, casting decisions, and creative visions. While some of these conflicts were professional, others reportedly bled into personal interactions. Friends hinted at subtle slights, disagreements at social gatherings, and moments where tensions seemed to boil beneath the surface. Investigators wondered if these pressures had any connection to the events leading to the murders, or if they merely provided. Financial considerations also played a role. The Reiners' estate, valued at $13.5 million, represented not just wealth but status, influence, and opportunity. While there was no evidence of financial disputes directly leading to the murders, the presence of substantial assets raised questions about motive, inheritance, and access. Investigators had to consider whether the allure of money, combined with psychological vulnerability, had played a part in Nick's alleged actions, or if it was simply a secondary factor in a far more complex psychological and relational equation. The discovery of emails, digital messages, and correspondence between Nick and various intermediaries suggested he was seeking guidance, validation, or influence from external sources. Whether these interactions were real or imagined, the fact that they existed indicated a mind grappling with outside pressures, whether from family, industry figures, or his own internal struggles. Investigators also examined the home itself for clues about the family dynamics. Personal spaces, such as bedrooms and study areas, revealed signs of routine and habit. Nick's room, in particular, was described as meticulously organized yet isolated, a physical reflection of his mental state. Disciplined yet cut off from the family he both loved and resented. Family photos, letters, and memorabilia painted a picture of a household steeped in love and tradition, but also punctuated by subtle fractures, moments of tension, quiet frustration, and private disputes that might never have surfaced publicly. Romy's statements to police further emphasized the complexity of the family's internal life. She described moments of warmth and joy alongside subtle conflicts, suggesting a family trying to maintain appearances while privately struggling with emotional undercurrents. She admitted that while Nick had always been challenging, she never imagined he could commit such a violent act. And yet, the combination of psychological fragility, family pressure, and alleged outside influence seemed to create a perfect storm. Hollywood's unique environment intensified these pressures. The industry thrives on ambition, competition, and visibility. Even private matters often become public fodder. Families like the Reiners, constantly in the limelight, navigate a delicate balance between personal life and public perception. For Nick, growing up in this environment may have amplified insecurities, magnified rivalries, and created a sense of urgency or desperation that contributed to his alleged actions. Friends of the Reiner family also hinted at long-standing tensions that extended beyond immediate family dynamics. Extended relatives, industry associates, and social acquaintances sometimes noted Nick's feelings of exclusion or resentment, particularly in high-profile events where attention and praise were lavished on siblings or parents. These seemingly small slights, compounded over years, may have seeded a sense of injustice or grievance that investigators now had to consider seriously. Investigators noted that while family pressure was a factor, the alleged involvement of external parties, specifically the claims about Martin Scorsese, added an entirely new dimension. Could Hollywood influence, professional rivalry, or even a misguided sense of mentorship have contributed to the tragedy? The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. The timing of communications, the content of the CNN audio, and Nick's own statements created a scenario in which internal family dynamics and external pressures converged with catastrophic consequences. Psychologists brought in for consultation emphasized the complexity of the situation. They described a scenario in which a young man, already struggling with mental health issues, becomes enmeshed in a web of family expectation, public scrutiny, and external influence. In such cases, actions that might otherwise be inconceivable can become terrifyingly plausible. The mix of personal grievance, desperation for recognition, and potential manipulation created a psychological landscape fraught with risk. As law enforcement and analysts continued their work, the narrative grew increasingly convoluted. The Reiner family's past, Nick's alleged confessions, the leaked audio, and the pressures of Hollywood all interwove into a tapestry that was part family tragedy, part industry scandal, and part psychological thriller. Every new detail, an email, a statement, a financial transaction, was scrutinized for hidden meaning, potential motive, and connection to the broader puzzle. And yet, for all the evidence, one piece remained elusive: the true nature of Scorsese's involvement. Was he a manipulator, a bystander, or merely a figure in Nick's mind to justify actions already contemplated? The ambiguity created tension not only for investigators, but also for the public, whose fascination with the case grew by the hour. What became clear, however, was that the tragedy at the Reiner estate was never just a matter of a single act of violence. It was a collision of history, secrecy, ambition, and pressure. Every family interaction, every whispered grievance, and every unspoken expectation had played a role in creating the conditions for this horror. And in Hollywood, where influence, power, and reputation are currency, those pressures are amplified exponentially. The investigators knew they had to dig deeper into the family's past. Every conversation, every argument, every tension that might shed light on why Nick did what he did and why he believed someone like Scorsese could be involved. They also had to consider what this meant for the future, for justice, for accountability, and for the fragile balance between public perception and private reality. And just when they thought they were beginning to understand the intersecting pressures that led to the tragedy, another revelation surfaced, something in the form of a hidden communication, a private document, or a suppressed testimony that promised to reveal a side of the Reiner family story no one had yet imagined. What came next would expose not just the hidden fractures of the family, but the forces of Hollywood that could push even the closest families to the edge. What would you do if a secret you'd been keeping for decades suddenly threatened to destroy everything? For Martin Scorsese, that moment arrived in a way few could have imagined. CNN's leaked audio revealed a voice layered with desperation, pleading, and an almost tangible fear, Scorsese himself begging the FBI to suppress information. The words were chilling, but the implications were far more disturbing. What was so dangerous, so consequential, that one of the greatest directors of all time would risk entangling himself in legal scrutiny, media uproar, and public scandal? The recording, obtained through undisclosed sources and verified for authenticity by independent analysts, captures Scorsese speaking in a tone that blends urgency with panic. "You have to understand," he says, voice cracking. "This cannot come out. Not now, not ever. Some truths are better left buried." At first, investigators struggled to understand the context. Was this fear about reputation, fear about legal consequences, or something far darker? Every word, pause, and inflection was dissected for hidden meaning. The audio begins with a sense of controlled composure, almost like a man rehearsing what he must say. But quickly, the composure unravels. The pleading grows urgent. Analysts noted that the phrases, "you must," "I insist," and "this cannot be known," appear repeatedly, a pattern that suggests not casual concern but the weight of something significant. Behavioral psychologists reviewing the audio argued that this wasn't mere panic. It reflected knowledge of events or actions that, if revealed, could have catastrophic consequences for both the speaker and potentially others implicated. Investigators paired the audio with Nick Reiner's arrest statements. The combination was both eerie and incriminating. Nick had claimed Scorsese was involved, that he had received guidance and influence from the legendary director. While Scorsese's voice never explicitly admits to criminal conduct in the recording, the urgency and vehemence suggested someone aware of an event's magnitude and desperate to control its narrative. The leaked audio didn't just raise questions about Scorsese, it raised broader questions about Hollywood influence. Could a figure of his stature manipulate or intimidate federal investigators? Could his fear of exposure indicate guilt, complicity, or perhaps something even more complex, such as knowledge he felt morally compelled to hide? The recording alone was enough to shake investigators' confidence in conventional assumptions about celebrity, power, and accountability. Breaking down the transcript, one phrase repeated itself in various forms. "You don't understand the consequences if this is released." The repetition wasn't redundant, it was tactical. Analysts argued that this was a deliberate emphasis, a warning to the listener, a plea that underscored a belief that the stakes were catastrophic. The choice of words like consequences implied both personal risk and the potential fallout for others, though investigators could only speculate on the full scope. In parallel, the FBI began cross-referencing the audio with other pieces of evidence. Surveillance footage from the Reiner estate, digital communications, and bank transactions. The goal was to determine whether the recording aligned with verifiable facts or whether it was merely a reactive, defensive measure from someone anxious about public perception. Early analysis revealed surprising consistencies. Timing, references to specific events, and contextual details matched other evidence collected by the investigative team. Media outlets immediately seized upon the leaked audio, sparking widespread speculation. News anchors replayed the phrases, dissecting tone and possible meaning. Social media erupted with theories. Some claimed Scorsese was covering up, others believed he was innocent but terrified of association, and still others proposed an elaborate conspiracy implicating Hollywood elites. The public fascination was both a reflection of celebrity culture and a testament to the human desire to understand how unimaginable tragedies intersect with the powerful. As the story unfolded, legal experts weighed in. Could the audio serve as evidence in court? Could it be admissible against Scorsese or even influence proceedings against Nick? Analysts debated for hours, pointing out that while the recording does not directly incriminate Scorsese in the act of murder, it establishes a degree of awareness and intent to conceal, a fact that could have profound legal and ethical implications. Psychologists and criminologists examining the recording noted patterns consistent with high-stakes deception. The urgency, the repetition, the stress markers, they all pointed to someone either deeply guilty or deeply afraid. Fear, in this context, was indistinguishable from culpability, and both interpretations carried heavy consequences for the unfolding investigation. The Reiner family, meanwhile, was forced to confront an almost surreal reality. Their grief, already monumental, was now entangled with questions about a figure so prominent, so respected, that discussing him publicly felt unthinkable. Romy, in particular, struggled with the dual burden of mourning her parents while trying to navigate a narrative that implicated one of Hollywood's most legendary figures. Each playback of the audio deepened the sense of betrayal and confusion. Investigators also considered the method of the leak. Who provided CNN with the recording and why? Was it a whistleblower within law enforcement, a disgruntled insider from Scorsese's camp, or someone seeking to manipulate public opinion? The answer remained elusive, but the leak itself underscored the high stakes involved. Someone wanted the world to hear the plea, and by extension, to know there was a story hidden beneath layers of secrecy. Technical analysis revealed that the audio had been recorded with high fidelity, likely captured in a controlled environment rather than as a casual phone conversation. Background noises, cadence, and timing indicated a deliberate effort by Scorsese to communicate seriousness and authority, not casual panic. The recording, therefore, became more than just evidence. It became a psychological portrait, revealing mindset, urgency, and the potential breadth of what he sought to conceal. Law enforcement also began mapping Scorsese's interactions with Nick and other intermediaries mentioned in the confession. Calls, emails, and financial transactions were scrutinized for any link that could substantiate the claims in the audio. The work was painstaking, complicated by gaps in records, encrypted communications, and the high likelihood of deliberate obfuscation. Every piece of evidence had to be validated, and every claim verified against multiple independent sources. Meanwhile, public speculation surged. Social media trends exploded with hashtags speculating on Scorsese's involvement. Forums and comment sections became virtual battlegrounds where armchair detectives, industry insiders, and casual observers debated every nuance of the recording. The intensity of the public discourse added additional pressure on the FBI and investigative teams to act with both speed and accuracy. Amid the chaos, one thing became clear: the audio was a turning point. It reframed the investigation from a family tragedy to a case with potential national and cinematic significance. Questions about accountability, power, and influence in Hollywood could no longer be ignored. And as investigators dug deeper, each new discovery seemed to suggest that what Nick Reiner had claimed, and what the audio hinted at, was far more than an allegation. But just when authorities thought they were beginning to piece together the significance of the recording, another revelation surfaced. Hidden segments, previously overlooked, contained references to events, dates, and individuals that could rewrite the narrative entirely. Names that had never been publicly associated with the Reiner family or Scorsese emerged, hinting at connections that no one could have anticipated. And that discovery set the stage for a revelation so shocking, so unprecedented, that the investigation would never be the same again. What happens when tragedy strikes not just a family, but an entire industry? For Hollywood, the Reiner murders were unlike anything it had faced before. A beloved family destroyed in their own home. A son arrested, claiming to act under the direction of one of the most legendary directors in cinema. And an audio leak suggesting that Scorsese himself was desperately begging the FBI to suppress the truth. The story hit the entertainment world like a lightning bolt, electrifying social media, late-night talk shows, and the corridors of power within studios and agencies alike. From the moment the news broke, Hollywood insiders scrambled. Agents, producers, and executives tried to make sense of the whirlwind. Gossip columns that had once reported on minor celebrity spats now scrambled to cover what appeared to be a conspiracy involving real violence, psychological manipulation, and potentially criminal collusion at the highest levels. Every major outlet, from Variety to The Hollywood Reporter, devoted breaking coverage, analyzing the recording, the confession, and the Reiner family's social history. For the public, the story became a fascination of almost morbid intensity. Fans of Rob Reiner, who had grown up admiring When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, and A Few Good Men, were left reeling. How could someone who had brought laughter and meaning to millions of people be associated with such horror? The human desire to reconcile good with evil clashed violently with the mounting evidence that something unimaginable had occurred behind the closed doors of the Brentwood estate. Social media erupted into a frenzy. On Twitter, hashtags like #ReinerTragedy, #ScorseseAudio, and #HollywoodConspiracy trended worldwide. Comment threads became battlegrounds, dividing the public into camps. Those who believed Scorsese was directly involved, those who thought Nick had fabricated the story, and those who suspected a more elaborate conspiracy involving unseen Hollywood power players. Memes and speculative threads spread like wildfire, blending satire with horror, humor with tragedy, and commentary with accusation. The story was no longer just news. It had become a cultural phenomenon. Late-night talk shows, which had long relied on humor and celebrity gossip, were forced to pivot. Hosts could barely contain their disbelief as they dissected the allegations, replayed portions of the leaked audio, and speculated about the power dynamics within Hollywood. The entertainment world had never before witnessed a narrative that combined murder, familial betrayal, celebrity scandal, and alleged director involvement in such a volatile cocktail. Industry insiders spoke off the record of a climate of fear and confusion. Some producers reportedly canceled meetings, worried that even casual association with the Reiners or Scorsese might tarnish reputations. Talent agencies began internal audits, reviewing client interactions, communications, and event attendance. Studios, meanwhile, were caught between respecting privacy and responding to public outrage. The situation created a ripple effect. Every contract, every project, and every association was suddenly under scrutiny. Journalists covering the story noticed a pattern in Hollywood's reaction: shock, disbelief, and a desperate need to maintain a veneer of control. Interviews with actors who had worked with Rob Reiner and Martin Scorsese revealed tension in conversations, moments of hesitation, and carefully measured statements. No one wanted to appear insensitive or implicated, but everyone seemed to sense that the narrative was evolving in a way that might reveal secrets no one wanted public. Meanwhile, the Reiner family had to navigate not only grief but the sudden spotlight that came with the scandal. Every public appearance, every statement, and even their social media presence was analyzed. Romy Reiner, still reeling from discovering her parents' bodies, faced the impossible task of managing both personal trauma and public scrutiny. Questions came from all directions. How could a family be destroyed from within? Was Hollywood, and figures like Scorsese, somehow involved? Could a culture of fame, influence, and power have contributed to the tragedy? As the frenzy grew, investigators faced pressure to produce answers quickly. Every new leak, every new social media post, and every new rumor had the potential to influence public perception and, ultimately, legal proceedings. Analysts and detectives had to work faster, verifying facts, corroborating statements, and mapping out timelines with extraordinary precision. The combination of public curiosity and media speculation made it nearly impossible to contain the narrative, further complicating the investigation. The audio leak, in particular, became the focal point of endless debate. Media outlets replayed Scorsese's words, analyzing tone, pitch, and urgency. Every pause, every inflection, became a potential clue. Some suggested that the repeated phrases were evidence of guilt. Others argued they reflected fear of public perception or professional consequences. Regardless, the mere existence of the audio changed the story's trajectory, transforming a domestic tragedy into a full-blown Hollywood scandal with national attention. Television segments explored possible motives.